babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan. Mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan. Mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ó ní màmá fọwọ́ kẹnu. Ó ní màmá fẹsẹ̀ kẹnu. Mo fọwọ́ kẹsẹ̀ orí gbẹ̀ndú. Mo fojú wokùn orí gbẹ̀ndú. Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ó ní màmá fọwọ́ kẹnu. Ó ní màmá fẹsẹ̀ kẹnu. Mo fọwọ́ kẹsàn orí gbẹ̀ndú. Mo fojú wokùn orí gbẹ̀ndú. Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ó ní màmá fọwọ́ kẹnu.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
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 Alùgbìnrin.
Isn't this one? Let's see if we move this. I don't think the camera will pick it up.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ó ní màmá fọwọ́ kẹnu. Ó ní màmá fẹsẹ̀ kẹnu. Mo fọwọ́ kẹsẹ̀ orí gbẹ̀ndú. Mo fojú wokùn orí gbẹ̀ndú. Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Babaláwo mo wá bẹ̀bẹ̀.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ògúngún tó ṣe fún mi lẹ́rẹ̀kan.
Alùgbìnrin.
Ó ní màmá fọwọ́ kẹnu. Ó ní màmá fẹsẹ̀ kẹnu. Mo fọwọ́ kẹsùn orí gbẹ̀ndú. Mo fojú wokùn orí gbẹ̀ndú.
Okay, are we ready to go? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is Jesmed F Suma, and we're here to discuss about corruption and the politics of Sierra Leone, and most importantly, what needs to be done to combat corruption. I shared a piece of write-up that I had written and distributed among friends and folks that I might be interested in the subject, so that they could find time to read and ask as many questions as possible. in relation to corruption in general. But I want to recap on some of the things that we discussed during our last show that was focused on corruption as it relates to the kleptomaniac and despotic governments that existed within the past 10 years. On that show, we pointed out that within the past 10 years between 2007 and 2017, our gross domestic product as a nation rose from an average of 3 billion to 4.2 billion. Year after year, that's about the amount of production, amount of goods, monetary value of goods and services Sierra Leone was producing, particularly when the iron ore production was added to our GDP. Now, on that show, I mentioned that our average tax rate was around 15%, which means the government was supposed to have collected an average of $600 million every year to run itself. But I was later corrected that the average tax rate was even beyond 15%. So it was around about 20%. 20% of 4 billion, it's about $800 million. Now imagine a government collecting $800 million every year to run itself. If you multiply that by 10, it's about $8 billion. So one can say within the past 10 years, the Nkrumah government may have collected or ought to have collected an average of $8 billion in 10 years. Now, when you add the now $3.7 billion debt, so they claim that they met a $700 million debt, inherited a $700 million debt, so we will give them that. So we will say $3 billion debt that they imposed on the back of the next generation. So one could say that adds it up to another another 3 billion to make it $11 billion that this government played with or ought to have played with. Now, if you add to that figure the average of $100 to $200 million aid, grant, and subsidies we received from donor agencies and foreign governments, you're talking about another $2 billion within 10 years. So literally, one can conservatively say the Nkrumah government played with an average of $10 to $13 billion within 10 years. Now, for those of us that have been following their activities and the way the kleptocracy that they were running, they're running a government in a mafia style and taking extortion from businesses, and those businesses avoiding to pay tax because they are paying extortions, they are paying protection fee, as I should call it, economic protection fee to officials of government. So those businesses were not necessarily paying some of those taxes directly to government because they were henchmen within the government that were collecting the money from businesses in lieu of making payments to the government. So that is why year after year, despite the huge money, huge access to funds and revenue that the government had, they found a way to squander it. And I will give you, we went over some of the ways that they were squandering the money. And one of the many ways that we were squandering the money was by an Nkrumah creating several agencies under his government, increasing the size of government, actually quadrupling the size of government from what he inherited to almost 4 times to what he inherited. So which obviously increased the annual budget. But most of the agencies created and most of the people that were placed in so many other departments were strictly people that had connections with his party and his tribesmen. So the issue of tribalism was very prevalent in his government, and the issue of favorism, particularly party members he used the government as an employment agency for party stalwarts. The other areas was by increasing the size of personnel in our various embassies. He also increased the number of embassies across the country, across the world, all of which brought serious constraints on the finances of the government. And they used that as an excuse to take loan and more loan from China and other partners just to pretend like they are running a government, but they were running a mafia enterprise. Now, you will also observe that during the process of when they were preparing for election, they were doing everything and under the table to subject the people of Sierra Leone into another $310 million debt for so-called airport. And that, as we know, is part of the pattern the Chinese government have been using in Africa to usurp the powers of the people of Africa through economic means. And that's what they wanted to do, as they did in 2012, because the Chinese government financed the election of Ernest Kroma's party in 2012. And they wanted to do the same thing in 2018 by finding a way to give them a loan or contract, give the government a contract right close to election. They do it every part in Africa. Some of us keep a track on the activities of the Chinese government in Africa, so we know exactly how they operate. So the modus operandi is that the election year or year before the election year, they always give this African government huge loans so that the party in power will use those monies to finance themselves into election. Now, another way, which we also discussed during our last show, another way Ernest Kroma used his network to siphon money to members of his family and members of his henchmen and his people within his party was by making sure that every government contract is given to someone that has direct or indirect connection with APC or the corruption network. So you have to remember, you don't necessarily always have to be a member of APC, but you have to be part of the corruption network. And the corruption network is usually controlled by the foreign entities, foreign players within the country. There are different categories of foreign players within the country. So I don't even need to go to the specifics of that because we all know them. In addition to that, you'll also see that instead of using government assets, government structures as offices for the agencies that he created to place some of his party agents and bootlickers that were campaigning for his party, instead of having those agencies placed in government buildings, he got people within his party to rent their own properties, their own houses to government. And these people were paying, the government was paying them tens and 20, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. There are some properties that we are paying for $120,000, some $50,000. Dollars, my people. We are dealing with leones in our Republic of Sierra Leone. That's our currency. But the foreign reserve, Ernest Kroma was using it as a cash cow to fill the pocket of his henchmen. Anybody who worships him, because that's what he likes. He likes people to worship him. And that's why when I went to Sierra Leone, he found a way to get me arrested, thinking that I was going to lay my belly on the floor and beg him, as some other people have done. I refused to do that. And, you know, if he knows my DNA, he will know that I'm not part of that class of people that will reduce themselves to that level. I don't care what you do. If you like, you can kill me. But in any case, that's how he used to, he intimidates people, and that's how he has been able to siphon money out of the system. And whilst schools were left unfunded, hospitals were left unfunded, roads were built. We talked about the infrastructure which the party or his government always thumped their chest for. Oh, we've built infrastructure, we built roads, we built infrastructure. That's the song, that's the theme of all the songs of praise that they always talk about. Now let's examine the so-called infrastructure. There are two major things that needs to be, maybe three, but let me focus on two major issues that we need to take out from the so-called infrastructure. Let's start with the energy. They spent an average of $760 million within 10 years on energy, including $25 million that Hafsatu Kabar embezzled, part of which she embezzled, and including the $380 million that they allegedly, this is a report that they sent out, allegedly spent on energy from the Ebola Recovery Fund. In the Ebola Recovery Fund, they donated to the government of Sierra Leone over $700 to $800 million. And they claim that they spent over $380 million on that, over $300 million on energy. Now, if they say they built energy infrastructure across the nation, why is it that days after they left office, the people are crying for electricity? As I speak, the current government is struggling to put the issues together because the so-called infrastructure that they claim that they built on energy was something that was sublet, was outsourced to a foreign ship that can move any second. Like I speak right now, if they feel like it, they sail away and Sierra Leone will be in darkness. And that is exactly what happened. Instead of building the infrastructure itself, building the energy producing structure within Sierra Leone, they made deals with foreign entities and siphoned our foreign reserves in the hands of foreign entities that came with a ship and put it on the shores of Sierra Leone, so that whenever they feel like it, the ship will just sail away. That is not infrastructure, that is robbery. If you can spend that amount of money, and yet we are in blackout, and yet 90% of the population do not have access to energy, man, I don't know what you have done. That is treason. And that is economic treason, as I will call it. Now let's look at the roads. They said they built roads across the nation. I understand that. They did build roads. But at what cost? There are some roads, the price tag was tripled. An average tripled. Now when you look at the highway, the so-called highway that they built that connects free towns to the provinces, I call it a death trap. It's a two-lane road. Because they don't want to spend much money in building the roads to be straight, they built substandard roads that is full of curves. And the roads are narrow and they're full of curves, and you call that highway? These guys, I'm sure they have seen highway because most of them have traveled abroad during his government. But I call it death trap because, especially at night, when you are driving on that road, you're not fortunate to meet 3, 4, 5 miles without having to navigate a curve. And sometimes most of the curves are blind curves. If you come across a vehicle that is crawling in front of you, you have very little option but to either crawl behind the vehicle or find a way to pass the vehicle. And when you do that, you will have to, swing into the opposite lane, which will expose you to the risk of getting involved in an accident. Of course, there are other factors that may have caused the accidents on those roads, such as poorly maintenance roads, overloading, and a whole lot of different issues. But the fact that the roads are substandard, according to World Bank estimates, about 2,055 people die every year on the roads of Sierra Leone. Road accident, 2,055 every year. So is it worth, not only in terms of the millions of dollars squandered on those roads, but most importantly, the fact that the roads are death trap, killing our people every day? You tell me if that's infrastructure that is worth praising. Now let's look at other factors. Yes, the issue of, a little freedom of press, one could say, has increased under his government. But guess what? It comes with the time. There were days when there were no WhatsApp. They have no control over that. There were days there were no Facebook. They had little control over that. So social media has made it difficult or almost impossible for them to police the media. But despite the different avenues we have in terms of disseminating news. These people found a way to lock up journalists, imprison students, threaten civil rights activists, ban civil activities within the past 10 years. So who can tell me that the Ernest Koroma government was not a despotic dictatorial government? You must be a fool. You must be living in some different world. But if you lived in the world of Sierra Leone as we know it, and you were not part of his kleptocratic government, then obviously you will know that he was leading a despotic government. Now, those are some of the issues we discussed. Now, how did we come up with the estimate of $1 billion for which I think they have to account for? Now, in addition to all the different avenues I've just mentioned in terms of how he siphoned money out of the system, he also made deals on contract and make sure that he only granted contract to people that are connected with him, either directly as family members or through his party or through the corruption network. You have to remember, you have a corruption network who, if you are part of that network, it is irrelevant whether you are part of the party or you're relevant whether you are his relative. But if you are part of that network, and usually the kingpins in that particular corruption network are the businesses. And most of those businesses are foreign businesses. Now, the few Sierra Leonean businesses that are part of the network are businesses associated with his party and his family. So the second category network is his family network. Cousins, like Bono Sise and others, and his brother, what is called it, the Koroma guy that imports rice. And you have another one that does construction. Though those has his family network. Of course, his sisters was the one taking over all the different contracts about hosting government seminars here and there and running cookery shops and whatever you have it. Just so that all the government money siphons back directly to him. Then the third network are the ones that are the barons of his party, the ones that runs the inner circle of his party. In fact, these are the ones that are going out to fish out the possibilities of siphoning money and feed into these other two networks. So you have three groups. You have the corruption network led by foreign enterprises, foreign entities. You have the family network. Those are people that are connected directly or indirectly to him. You have the party network. They are the ones that brings out the contract and feed the other two networks. That's how the system of corruption was working. So now, why is that relevant? It is relevant because we need to understand how corruption is practiced in Sierra Leone before we can find a solutions to it. Now, you have another way. When they give people contracts, they give you contract. First of all, you have to be part of any of these three networks before you get the contract. And when you get the contract, this is how the civil servant also siphoned or benefited out of the network. Because when they give contract out, you are required to pay a certain percentage. At first, we used to hear years back during Sheikh Stephen days, it was like 5%, maybe sometimes 10%. Now it's gone to 15-20%. Now you imagine if you have to pay 15-20% out of something you need to deliver, how are you going to bill anything substantial and you make profit out of that? So obviously, some of these contracts we are giving out to people as a way to siphon money out of the government, not necessarily for them to deliver on the contract. So, over the period, I have estimated, if you consider the fraud, the waste of government resources, and abuse of government resources, my estimation is that these guys were siphoning an average of $95 million a year. $95 to $10 million a year. If you add the per diems that they gave out to their henchmen, this guy, his network was so sweet. If you are part of it, even if you are a bag handler, you have a way of siphoning money. Imagine somebody traveling with their henchmen, going to UN conferences, spending $100, $200, $300 million because they live in 5-star hotels, paying themselves $400, $500 per diem, per day. Can you imagine that? When teachers did not have pay. Schools do not have resources. Our kids and our students, our children, roaming the streets of Freetown, selling diamonds, selling biscuits, selling basic wares just to survive, let alone go to school. Hospitals are empty. And yet these guys could afford to pay themselves $300 to $400 a day when they travel out of the country. Sometimes some travel with their girlfriends, some travel with their henchmen, because the henchmen are there to go siphon prostitutes for them to feed them their insatiable nature of satisfying themselves. And of course, the internal abuse of women was an open secret within his government. Inside his government, within his government, if you are a woman, what betide you if you are beautiful? Maybe you should pray to God, say, if I want to work in this government, make me ugly. But if you are beautiful and you are in that government, believe you me, there is no way you will get a senior position without one of them sleeping with you. It's a given factor. Some of us followed all of that. We know it. And when they do it, they bounce the woman back to another person. I'm very sorry, I'm not spiting all the women. It may not be all of them. Maybe there is 5 or 10% of them that are exempted from that. Particularly those that were not married. We know what they were doing. We are following everything. We know their assets over in the US, every part of it, we're keeping track of it. We know where their monies are. And we can find a way to siphon those so that we can build schools and build roads and fix roads and supply our farmers tools so they can produce rice and food to feed ourselves. For heaven's sake. These guys had no conscience. They were wicked. They were heartless. They had no pity on the poor people. And when you go down to Freetown, everybody, you see kids lining up, begging, making the nation a nation of beggars. Just as they were proud of being able to go beg into the Arab countries, Chinese countries, and other people, because the Western world have been tired of giving them money. So they now go to the Middle East and Asia and continue to beg. And they are boastful of it. They say they are the best beggars if you should elect them because they can beg. So those are some of the issues we discussed. Now let's talk about solution. But before I do, we have another guest who is going to be joining me shortly. One, Dr. Ansu Kaikai, alias Kochi. He's also a political activist. I don't know what his political leaning is, but I guess he's here. Probably he will be able to help, make the show a little more interactive than just listening to me talking to you guys. So we're going to delve into how to solve corruption in Sierra Leone shortly, and I encourage you guys to please. Okay. I encourage you guys to send in your questions because my friend and colleague here, Dr. Ansu Kaikai, is going to help ask those questions as you guys pose them, and I will try to answer some of those questions as the time goes. Now, particularly for those who may have taken the time to read the article that I wrote on how to address corruption in Sierra Leone, please feel free to pose your questions on my wall or on this live show. And I'm sure my friend here will be able to read them out, and we will be able to. So that's you're watching it there. Yes. Welcome, man. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Nice meeting you.
Yes.
Do you have a tissue? Because I'm sweating.
It's hot.
Yes. It's all the gadgets that are running.
You guys are live. Keep talking.
Yes. So guys, please ask questions, please. Feel free to ask questions. Now, how do we address the issue of corruption in Sierra Leone is the key theme of the topic. That's the theme, meaning that is the fundamental thing that drives the discussion right now. So free to ask as many questions as possible. So you can make any comment in terms of what's your view?
Yes, good evening, listeners and viewers. I was listening very passionately to my colleague, Mr. Jesmed. I actually saw the enthusiasm in his voice about corruption. And of course, we know that corruption is something that has become endemic in the systemic structure of Sierra Leone.
Thank you. And I like the fact that you added the word systemic, because it's gone beyond endemic.
Right.
It is a network.
Right.
And if you want to fight corruption, part of the issues that I noted in my article, in my piece that I wrote, is that they should not broaden the network. We shouldn't broaden the network, because realistically speaking, within the past 10 years, if you are a saint from the Pope of Rome sent to Sierra Leone, and you are working within that administration within the past 10 years, believe you me, within the past 10 years, you just need to take you about a year or two, you will never be a saint again.
Right.
So, which means the practice of corruption has become so systematic that every organ of government was forced to practice it. So if you want to fight corruption in Sierra Leone now, please don't try to fight everybody. You will never be able to get hang of it. In fact, you will create more enemies for yourself, because there are judges in the judicial system that are culpable of being part and parcel of that corruption. We need to let them and give them opportunity to reform themselves, because most of the civil servants that you see within the system, they follow the cue that is set by the politicians. You understand? The police is based on the leadership. If the leadership is corrupt, the entire network of the police will be corrupt. So you don't want to broaden. We need them to help us fight the top guns. So you go after the top guns, those who created the network, the individual businesses that were part and parcels, taking contracts from these corrupt governments. They need to be, haunted. And the very politicians, they need to be haunted. So you set an example at the top, and the message will go down. What do you think?
Yeah, you're very right. But I just want to differ a little bit.
Okay.
Because people believe that corruption is just material. That is when somebody goes and embezzles money. It is right. But corruption is also when you interpret a word or an expression that is different from its original meaning just to suit your convenience in government. That is corruption. Exactly. Yes. An example, if you circumvent the constitution to suit your party or a body that you have interest in, that is corruption. We have seen that in Sierra Leone very blatantly, and that has eaten, as I just said, very deep into the fabric of our society. We have seen justice circumvented. What has led, well, let me say, what actually led to the rebel war? Let's look at that. What led to the rebel war? And let's go back again to the APC era. Sheki said, who said a Thai cow, that day they eat. That was that. Look at that magazine. Let us examine that magazine. That was institutionalized corruption. And people became disgruntled. And people became embittered. Some people are sent to jail. Yes. And when they came out, they became people who believe that to correct the system, it has to be by violence. And we saw what happened in Sierra Leone. Yes. 10 years of bloody civil war. That was the outcome of corruption. But the question now is corruption settled in Sierra Leone? That is the big question. Have we actually addressed corruption?
No, hell no. We've not addressed corruption. Now, let me buttress on some of the points you raised.
Right.
It is true. There are several phases to corruption. From the legal point of view, you have bribery is a form of corruption. Embezzlement is a form of corruption. They have what is called graft is a form of corruption. The most important one, abuse of discretional powers, is a form of corruption.
Right.
And extortion is a form of corruption.
Right.
So we're going to give examples of how each and every aspect of this type of corruptions are practiced in Sierra Leone. For instance, when you talk about extortion, we know extortion as a means of threatening somebody to do what you want them to do for fear of you not doing them something, either exposing some secret about them or suing them or doing something to threaten them, to force them to do what is wrong. That is what is known as extortion. But there is a different way to look at it, the way it's practiced in Sierra Leone. If you are looking at extortion from that angle, it will be almost impossible for you to find anybody to find culpable. But some other way is, what they do is, you go to an office, you want to go register a business, you want to clear some consignment from the key, you want to register a vehicle, you want to get your driver's license, you want to go for a passport. What they do is that because they want to force you to bribe them, in some cases, they don't even waste any time. They tell you, put this down. Put this million, 1 million, 2 million, or whatever amount down. I experienced it when I went to go register a business in Sierra Leone. The guy made it plain I should put 1.5 million leones down. Now, if you refuse, you want to go through the official channel, they will leave you hanging for days, weeks, and perhaps months for something that should take few days. So that's one aspect we need to look at.
Right.
The other aspect I want to touch on the third one, the abuse of discretional powers. And in fact, that one happened to me personally, and it happened to a couple of number of people that I was with, especially within the court system. Now, within our court system, our constitution give rights to everybody to a bail. You have rights to a bail as long as the crime that you've committed is not treason, as long as the crime that is committed is not murder. But every other crime, whether you stole somebody's money, or you involved in an accident, or you failed to pay something, they are all offenses that are subject to bail.
And bail is free. People
Free.
don't know that.
Yes.
Bail is free.
But what has happened, what used to happen, I hope our judicial system, our attorney general is going to look into that. What used to happen is that the right to bail, even though it is guaranteed by our constitution, was being abused because the judges and magistrates have the discretion to grant bail. But because they wanted to trade that right to bail, they will deny you bail immediately.
Okay, let me just interject a little bit. What about somebody who commits murder? Is that person...
No, that's why I said treason and murder.
Yes.
According to our constitution, you're not liable to bail.
Well, okay, well...
But
yeah,
every other crime...
I just want to make reference to something that happened very recently. Somebody was accused of killing a young lad 2 years ago. He was stabbed and he was incarcerated for 2 years. And when the new government came, right, they bailed him. He's charged with first-degree murder. They bailed him 500 million. I don't know who paid the 500 million. He's out. Yeah, that's why I'm asking you that question. Whether bail is limited to only those crimes.
Well, realistically, it's still discretional to the judge and the magistrate that is presiding over the case. It's discretional to them to grant bail, irrespective of the nature of the crime. But the constitution specifically isolates treason and murder. So which means if the magistrate or judge deny you bail for treason and murder, that is something that you cannot argue with. You understand?
Right.
But every other crime, you're liable, you're subject to the right of a bail. Another thing that used to happen that is still, I hope the Attorney General is going to look into it also. Our constitution says when somebody is arrested, there are certain rights that you have that the police by law must accord to you.
Miranda rights, right.
Here in America, they call it Miranda rights.
Right.
One, well, realistically, there is nothing like a Miranda rights in Sierra Leone's constitution in terms of them reading. Miranda rights is when the police is obligated to read your rights to you. So we need to institute something similar to Miranda rights, which says you have the right to know for why the police is arresting you. You have the right to be free from torture and abuse. You have the right for you to require the presence of an attorney in giving your statement. You have the right for you not to be in prison for more than 72 hours, otherwise, except the police have to charge you within 72 hours.
Yes.
But in Sierra Leone,
what I'm trying to say here is these rights are embedded in the fundamental human rights of every citizen. and I'm sure Sierra Leone is a signatory to the Fundamental Human Rights Commission in the United Nations. I'm very sure of that. And something that brings focus to me is remaining silent when you are arrested. You have the right to remain silent. At any time, they may arrest you and they want to question you. You have the right to say, no, I'm not going to say anything. I want to talk to an attorney. In Sierra Leone, this right is really abridged. The moment you're arrested, you are found guilty. And of course, you start to suffer the consequences right there. Right. And let alone if you are remanded. If when you are put to remand, your fundamental human right is encroached on. By the time they imprison you or they sentence you, you will have been half dead. So let's look at the prison system as well and see how we can curb this system of corruption, because that's also an aspect of corruption. Because if at all they are misinterpreting your right, yes, as enshrined in the Constitution, it becomes alarming. See?
Well, in terms of the prison, I've been there, so I know what it looks like and how it feels like, and what happens inside and outside of the prison network. And part of the problem has to do with the leadership of the prisons network itself. The very director himself is a direct relative. You see, this nepotism, I forgot to mention that nepotism is one form of corruption also, and nepotism is rampant at every level and every department within the system of government. So much so that people that are qualified and fit to be in certain positions are denied those positions just because somebody wants to make sure that those jobs and opportunities are given to their relatives. Just like Ernest Nkrumah did, he made sure the director that was at the prison, a professional man who had experience in running prison system, has been to different parts of the world, knows how to reform the prison system. What they did, he found a way to kick the man out, and then he elevated his cousin by skipping him over other people at different levels and put him at the echelons of the prison department. So the message I have for President Bio, if you are fighting corruption and you are expecting those guys that we are going to probably imprison to be sent to Pademba Road, and you think those guys will stay in Pademba Road, if you have that director sitting down there, an Nkrumah's cousin that dance and sing to an Nkrumah's tune, you must be joking. That guy needs to go.
Okay, well,
so we need to clean up the system.
Yes.
We need professionals to head those agencies, and prison is one place that needs to be cleaned up.
Mr. Suma, I have a question
Yes.
for you at this point.
Yes.
Suppose somebody has been accused of corruption, right? And you punish him, and you have your friend or your relative who does the same thing, and you try to cover that person. What do you actually call that act? How do you describe it?
Well, that's also is corruption, because everybody should be equal before the law.
Right.
And if you pick and choose as to who you are going to enforce the law on and exempting people within your own family and network, it's also corruption by itself. That is why we have different political parties. They can be looking at that, observing the way this current government is currently administering the affairs of government, the way they're nitpicking the administration of justice, pick up those, use that against them in election, and boot them out. So that is corruption by itself.
Okay, then let me also refer you to a statement by the present chief minister, who said if you are given a contract of say 100% contract, and you do whatever you want to do with the money, and you keep 1% or 10% to your pocket, how do you describe that?
Well, realistically, I don't think the guy was condoning corruption. Let's try to be realistic in terms of, let's don't begin to read too much into people's comments.
Right.
What he was saying, he was accepting the reality of what prevails, meaning that we could do everything under the sun, but we're not going to completely eradicate corruption. So what he's saying in that case, that if you are given a task you are assigned certain amount of money to do certain job. Please make sure you satisfy the objectives of the job.
Well, I personally feel that.
So if you've seen that you've done a good job, for instance, let's say you give somebody $100 million contract to fix our airport. They fix the airport. Everybody is amazed. People say, wow, 100 million? Maybe this looks like 200 million, 150 million. And maybe you find out that man has embezzled $100,000. It is bad.
No, what I'm
but
saying...
I don't think that's something...
No, what I'm saying, when fighting corruption, there should not be any gray area.
No, there's no gray area.
No, that's the gray area you're talking about.
No, I don't think he meant it to be gray area.
There should not be any exception. Particularly, he is a senior member of government.
That is true.
It was unfortunate.
In my point of view, he has misspoken.
I don't know whether he misspoke.
I think he misspoke.
I believe, right, he's a professor. He has been dealing with people. And I know he knows his limitations. So I wonder how you're going to misspeak at that point. Very important issue for discussing.
That was not...
It's not unfortunate.
That was...
Okay, now let me ask you a question again.
Yes.
Let's go to the appointments made by this present government. Let's look at it's so ironic that the anti-corruption commissioner was appointed in a fashion that I believe is corrupt. Right, because there are procedures. And when you circumvent those procedures just to suit your own interests, because you want to, right, make that person what you want him to be, right, that is corruption.
That is absolutely true.
Right.
Let's
look at the speaker.
But let's the speaker, that one is another issue. That one there,
yes.
That one is completely corrupt the way they did that. But let me address the first one. Now, it is true that the Anti-Corruption Act requires that, one, there has to be a recommendation made to the president for the firing of the commissioner and his deputy from office. And the president will then set up a tribunal to look into the matter, and that tribunal will present their report to the House of Parliament, and you have to have 2/3 majority. That's it, 3/4 majority? I don't know. 70% or so. For that particular motion to pass. Now, let's look at the composition of the current parliament. And let's look at the silent area within the Anti-Corruption Act itself. I know there will have been challenges, but I still think the president should have used that opportunity to go through that process and find a way to follow the right approach in getting rid of the grossly incompetent and perhaps grossly corrupt former anti-corruption commission. If an act of parliament is altered by one letter, that particular bill has to be represented to the very house for ratification. Failure to do that, technically speaking, you can say the particular law is not binding. That is the technical aspect we're looking at. So looking at the situation as it is in the House of Parliament right now,